I would like to take that man's place. He has a wife and children. Imagine the absolute dead silence that fell over the Auschwitz death camp in 1941. A prisoner literally stepped right out of line, looked the Nazi guards in the eye, and spoke those world-stopping words. It's a moment of sacrifice that just completely defies human comprehension. It literally ground the machinery of hatred to a halt.
Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're zeroing in on a man whose life traced a stunning, almost unbelievable path. We're talking about someone who went from being a cutting-edge media pioneer to an absolute ultimate martyr of charity. Let's just dive right in and explore exactly how his life unfolded and really why his story still resonates so powerfully for us today.
Section 1. Vision of Two Crowns, a Childhood Prophecy.
Okay, let's dive into this. To actually understand the end of his life, we have to rewind all the way back to 1903 in Poland. According to his own later accounts, when he was just a 9-year-old kid, young Raymond Kolbe, that was his birth name by the way, had a profound vision of the Virgin Mary. And in this vision, she offered him 2 crowns. The white crown meant that he should persevere in purity and service. The red crown meant he would become a martyr. She asked him, which one is he willing to accept? His audacious choice? He looked at them and said he would accept them both. That single, incredibly bold decision literally became the narrative arc of his entire life. Pretty much everything he did from that point on was chasing those 2 crowns.
Section 2. A Catholic Media Empire. The White Crown Realized.
So, as Raymond grew into adulthood, he joined the conventual Franciscans and took the name Maximilian. But listen, he was absolutely not your typical secluded friar locked away in a monastery. Not at all. He channeled that vow of service, that white crown, into building a sprawling, modern publishing ministry. 1 million. Think about that number for a second. That is just a staggering figure for the 1930s. He founded a movement called the Militia of the Immaculata, and both that movement and his flagship magazine ultimately reached 1 million members and subscribers. He looked around and saw religious indifference as the deadliest poison of his day, and he was completely convinced that modern mass media was the antidote. And this brilliantly illustrates just how far he was willing to go. Kolbe didn't just sit around writing pamphlets. The guy built a literal city. He founded Nepokalanov, or the City of the Immaculata, which eventually housed nearly 700 friars dedicated entirely to mass media. I mean, they were running a daily newspaper with a weekend circulation of 225,000. He even went out and got an amateur radio license. His call sign was SP3RN, just so he could broadcast his message over the airwaves. He was out there leveraging the absolute cutting edge of technology to build an unprecedented Catholic media center.
Now, history is always complex, and we absolutely have to look at the full picture here. During the 1920s and 30s, some of Kolbe's publications did include the controversial anti-Masonic and anti-Zionist rhetoric that was common in parts of Europe at that time, basically accusing Freemasons and Zionists of anti-church plots. Yet when World War II actually broke out, Kolbe's actions spoke to a profound humanitarianism. His massive friary opened its doors to shelter refugees, literally hiding 2,000 Jewish people from Nazi persecution. At one point, when a local asked him if they should give bread to the Jewish refugees, Kolbe simply answered, "Yes, it is necessary to do this because all men are our brothers."
Section 3. The Nagasaki Mission, Expanding East.
So Kolbe's ambitions, they definitely weren't contained just to Poland. This is such an audacious micro-narrative within his broader life. Picture this, it's 1930 and he arrives in Japan. He has essentially zero money and absolutely no Japanese language skills. None. Yet, by 1931, against all odds, he founds a brand new friary on the slopes of Mount Hikosan in Nagasaki. He called it the Garden of the Immaculata. And get this, he specifically chose a steep, incredibly difficult mountainside to build on. Why? Well, because the land was cheap and that strictly aligned with his vow of poverty. By 1932, he's building a replica Lourdes Grotto right there on the property and publishing a Japanese version of his magazine. He was eventually recalled to Poland in 1936 to manage his massive operations back home, but his impact in Japan, that was firmly cemented.
Section 4. Prisoner 16670 at Auschwitz. The Red Crown Realized.
Let's move to how this all builds to the climax of his life. With the Nazi invasion of Poland, Kolbe's massive influence and his work sheltering refugees made him a major target. In February 1941, the Gestapo shut down his monastery and arrested him. By May, he was transferred to the grim, horrific reality of Auschwitz. He was stripped of his identity and branded simply as Prisoner 16670. The stage was now set for the realization of that second crown, the Red Crown of Martyrdom. Which brings us to a pivotal question, one that really defines the core of this entire explainer. What happens when absolute hatred meets absolute charity? You see, in late July 1941, a prisoner successfully escaped from Auschwitz, and in a brutal reprisal, the deputy camp commander ordered a terrifying punishment for the men left behind in that escapee's block.
The sequence of events in the selection line is absolutely chilling. First, the guards arbitrarily pick 10 men to be sent to an underground bunker. Their sentence? To be starved to death. Second, when one of the selected men, Franciszek Gajowniczek, broke down, crying out in total despair for his wife and children, the unthinkable happened. Third, Maximilian Kolbe calmly stepped out of the ranks. The guards were literally dumbfounded. When they asked who he was, Kolbe didn't flex his fame or mention his massive media empire. He simply identified himself as a Catholic priest, and he volunteered his own life to take that condemned man's place.
But the truly crucial point is what happened next, down in the pitch black of Block 11. Historically, the starvation bunker was a place of total madness, despair, and unimaginable suffering. But under Kolbe's presence, the atmosphere completely shifted. The bunker echoed not with screams, but with hymns and prayers. Witnesses, including an assistant janitor who survived, later testified that Kolbe miraculously sustained the spirits of his fellow condemned men. He led them in prayer day after day, and each time the guards checked on him, they found him just standing or kneeling calmly in the middle of the cell. Amazingly, he survived without food or water for 2 grueling weeks, until he was the very last one fully conscious.
Finally, impatient to empty the bunker, the guards decided to hasten the end for the remaining 4 prisoners. On August 14, 1941, they brought in lethal injections of carbolic acid. Kolbe is said to have simply raised his left arm and calmly waited for it. Right there, in that dark, underground cell, his lifelong pursuit of the Red Crown of Martyrdom was finalized.
Section 5. A Martyr of Charity, the Indestructible Legacy.
Now, what's really interesting about this is why this incredible story actually matters to us today, and how his legacy somehow survived the utter destruction of World War II. Consider this stunning historical reality. In August 1945, the atomic bomb completely devastated the city of Nagasaki, wiping out the vast majority of its Catholic population and churches. Yet Kolbe's friary survived the blast. But why? Well, because years earlier, when he chose that steep, difficult mountain ridge to build on simply because it was cheap and aligned with his vow of poverty, that very same mountain ridge ended up shielding the friary from the direct impact of the atomic blast. His absolute commitment to poverty literally saved his Japanese mission, allowing it to continue operating to this very day. That is just incredible.
Decades later, in 1982, Pope John Paul II canonized Kolbe, officially declaring him a martyr of charity. And incredibly, Franciszek Gajowniczek, the very man whose life Kolbe saved back in Auschwitz, survived the Holocaust and was actually sitting right there in attendance at the ceremony. Today, Kolbe's diverse patronages perfectly reflect his multifaceted, heroic life. He's the patron saint of prisoners and families, directly representing his sacrifice. He's the patron of drug addicts because of the specific manner in which he died. And he's even the patron saint of journalists and amateur radio operators, which is a fantastic nod to his massive media empire and that old SB3RN radio license. So, we end our explainer with this thought. A novelist writing about Kolbe once described love as the radically subjective element of history. It's the thing that interrupts the normal, brutal flow of events. Maximilian Kolbe made choices that completely defy human instinct. He chose poverty, he built a media empire from absolute scratch, and ultimately, he chose to die so a total stranger could live. So if love really is the radically subjective element of history, how will your choices echo in the darkest of times? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep learning, keep seeking the truth, and I'll see you next time.